I wish to make a complaint.
Sorry, we're closing for lunch.
Never mind that, my lad. I wish to complain about this parrot what I purchased not half an hour ago from this very boutique.
Oh, yes, the Norwegian blue. What's wrong with it?
I'll tell you what's wrong with it. It's dead. That's what's wrong with it.
Let me clarify something to begin with.
Okay, go ahead.
So I realized that when we got into the issue of collectivism, and when I called Stalinism and Maoism, as well as anarchism, a kind of liquidation into petty bourgeois democracy, I think that people have this idea that petty bourgeois means individualistic. And no, petty bourgeois also means collectivistic. So when thinking about like early bourgeois society, it's very collectivistic, like Puritanism, Salem witch trials, right? When we think of like, I don't know, the founding fathers of the United States and how they were anxious about mob rule, right? They were concerned about a kind of collectivism that is not the big, massive state capitalist collectivism that we have in mind coming out of the 20th century. They have much more in mind the kind of local community collectivism of petty bourgeois democracy.
Tribalism would be how we would say it today, maybe?
We might, communitarianism, sectarianism. But again, like if we situate it at the level of like the Puritans and the Salem witch trials, then people know what we're talking about, right? Because again, like that's the way I understand Stalinism. That's the way I understand a struggle session. A struggle session is the Salem witch trial.
Yeah.
Right? It's not the Spanish Inquisition, which you can say is some kind of top-down, papal, kind of like bureaucratic, right? It's more like the people getting together and looking around at each other and saying, who's a witch?
Yeah, but in relation to Mao, right? Relation to this big state.
Right.
And unleashed by that state.
But Mao was not in charge of the state anymore. That was the whole point, right? He was kind of on the out. And then he launched the Cultural Revolution in order to gain influence again. And it was a popular mobilization. And it did take place in a very localistic kind of way. It was everywhere. It was in every community. And people took it up. In other words, people only listened to Mao because it spoke to them, right? And again, that's going to sound like it commends Mao. And it's kind of like, yeah, but let's think about the overall historical situation. The world historical situation in China. Again, if Moise Postone said, well, we wanted to redeem what the Cultural Revolution meant to us. In reality, it was bureaucratic infighting by Mao against his opponents and the cynical mobilization of the people. But what we wanted it to be was an authentic grassroots mass movement. And I'm like, actually, authentic grassroots mass movement is Stalinism. That is Stalinism right there. And that's petty bourgeois democracy right there. That doesn't commend it.
What is it about that authentic grassroots mass movement that is petty bourgeois democracy? Is it the idea of it being authentic?
It's not just the authenticity issue. It's really just the basis. In other words, on what basis are people asserting collective solidarity? It's the fraternité of the French Revolution. It is deeply authoritarian. And, again, Frankfurt School, Horkheimer and Adorno get into trouble where they're like, fascism has its roots in the French Revolution. It's like, wait, what? Didn't the Nazis reject the French Revolution? Didn't Goebbels say, now we're going to undo 1789? Yes. But it also does come out of Jacobinism. Socialism comes out of Jacobinism, and fascism comes out of socialism. That's it. I mean, that's just it. And, you go back to the early, again, petty bourgeois democracy of the free city-states of Europe in the Renaissance, in the late medieval period in the Renaissance, you can see a very authoritarian reality that's very popular participatory. Right? Again, the Protestant Reformation.
So, okay, the struggle session, just to stay on that for a moment. When I look at the struggle session,
the collectivism is very concrete.
Right. Well, when I think about the struggle session, I think, well, the problem with the struggle session is that the bourgeois foundation for justice has been stripped away and replaced by a local communitarian shared understanding, which is majoritarianism. So like, why do we have due process? It's not because through due process we're always going to arrive at the truth.
No.
Right? But it's a limitation on power.
And the jury.
Yeah.
It's a limitation on what the jury can hear and what they can't hear.
Right. And also on the kinds of punishments.
Certain things, they're going to be like, lynch him.
Right. And also on the kinds of punishments that they can enact.
And also they hear certain truths, right? In other words, so it's about exclusion of evidence that is true. It's true evidence against the defendant that you don't want the jury to hear because it's going to cause them to convict the defendant, even though it's true.
It will prejudice them.
Yeah. But what does that mean?
It
prejudice
means that
them as to the guilt, the actual guilt. Like, in other words, this person's actually guilty. This evidence shows their actual guilt.
You don't exclude evidence that will demonstrate the guilt of the crime as it's defined by law.
No, you do.
You exclude evidence that is prejudicial, that is something that they are guilty of, but does not necessarily relate to the crime or the issue.
But they exclude things. They exclude things that show the actual guilt for the crime charged, that are gotten by illicit means by the police.
Well, okay, sure.
In other words, why should the people be punished, Doug, for the police's mistake? Isn't it still in the interest of justice?
Because it's in the interest of the people to not have a police that can use illegal means to acquire evidence. Those
even
limits
if it's against an actually guilty person, even if it is in the interest of justice. See, this is
once you get it illegally, you can't know. The whole thing is the evidence itself is now tainted because of the method. But
well, it is and it isn't. In other words, you can be sure that the Stalinists and the Maoists don't care about any of that. They don't care about legalism. They care about truth and justice. And don't we all? Right? That's why earlier on, like several months ago, before the Gaza war, I reminded you that guilty people have rights too. Including the right not to be prosecuted. Including the right not to be investigated. Like, you are actually guilty of a crime against the law and the books. You have a right not to be investigated.
That's right, but not because as a guilty person you have a special right not to be investigated.
But because actually
not as an individual, but because of the collective.
The community has an interest in not prosecuting all guilty criminals, even though they themselves, if you were to put it to them, should you prosecute every single criminal, they would say yes. But actually, they have an interest higher than what they know. And that's in the law, as opposed to in this or that politician or this or that like prosecutor or this or that lawyer.
But it has to do, the way I understand it, Chris, is it has to do with epistemic humility and using.
It's not, though. It could be actually true. In other words, it's not about what we can't know. It's about actually you want to let some things slide. You actually do want to let things slide. In other words,
okay,
right? You want to let things slide.
Right. You don't want to. Right. Well.
No, seriously. It gets Bernard Mandeville, Fable of the Bees.
No,
even the criminals contribute to society.
Okay, but also, what the sometimes overcoming criminality would create conditions that are more criminal than the criminality that you're trying to overcome.
That's true.
I'll give the no broken windows policy, right?
Sure.
Right. Those people really did break the law. They were, but the reason why you normally wouldn't go after them is because empowering the state to that degree, even if it does have the beneficial
effects,
right, is nonetheless a danger to the freedom of the population. So, okay, that's true as well. So I'll grant you two reasons why people should be protected from prosecution. That one, and
the wisdom of bourgeois society is this. The wisdom of bourgeois society is the non-identity of the law and the society. In other words, that the law comes secondary to society. The law struggles to keep pace with society. What's a crime today won't be considered a crime tomorrow because it's actually not a crime today. We just don't know it yet. Right? And that's the problem with democracy. That's why the struggle for socialism is a struggle to overcome democracy, which doesn't mean arbitrary dictatorship or lynch mob justice either. Right? It means let's overcome a society where we want to rouse a lynch mob.
But here's I think the problem with this idea. This is my reaction to the idea that, oh, we should purposely let guilty people go, and not prosecute people when they're actually guilty, is because I, in my maybe secret Stalinist heart or old
we all
left,
struggle with this idea. The idea is that there are some principles that are much smarter than we could ever be.
Right, but I worry that the people who will be let, who won't be prosecuted, are those who have the most power in society.
No, I understand. Like, if you don't want to empower the beat cop to decide what they're paying attention to and what they aren't in enforcing the law, because isn't that going to favor the powerful? Not always.
Right.
And anyway, what does the most powerful mean? Right? In other words, of course, there's actually a rationale to letting rich people get away with crimes that poor people aren't allowed to get away with, because after all, aren't the rich people contributing more to the community than the poor people are? Actually, they are. Their activity counts more. It does. Right? I mean, the point of the matter is that that's not the problem with this society. The problem with this society is not privilege. It's not. That is not the problem. Whether by race, gender, class, money, that's not the problem with this society. It's not a privilege problem. It's a capital problem. Right? That's the hard part, because of course we are bourgeois, which means that we all have our inner petty bourgeois sense of justice that screams out. Right? And it's like, you know what? The Proletarian Party for Socialism, it can't be about that. It really cannot be about that. Because that's going to mislead you. It's going to turn you into the most radical petty bourgeois Democrat. Every time.
Right. Which is a great way to become a monster.
It is. It's a great way to become a monster. I mean, I brought up lynch mob justice. People forget that most people who were lynched were not black in the United States. Of course not. Blacks were always a small minority in the United States. Most people who were lynched were white. And guess what? They were guilty and they deserved it.
Well,
seriously.
No, because we have laws about punishment as well, and the extent to which.
But there were corrupt sheriffs who weren't going after the people, and so the people took justice into their own hands, and that's cool too, right? It's just
but cruel and unusual punishment is forbidden.
Yes, I know.
Okay.
Well, by the state. The state. By the state is different.
Yeah, but why do we bar the state?
What I'm saying is the good petty bourgeois values of the American Revolution and American democracy, they're good. They included things like you're going to go get the guilty person out of the jail and kill them yourself because you don't trust the state to do it. That's all fine. Like, Thomas Jefferson smiles upon that. He does. That has nothing to do with, and it might be contrary to, the struggle for socialism.
Okay.
As a means to an end. As a means to an end, right? In other words, you might have to accept that people are going to do that, right? So you can't sort of a priori condemn, right? But you can also say, but we're not really about organizing people to do that. Like, that's not the point. Like, you don't organize a proletarian socialist party to be able to lynch people that the state doesn't prosecute.
Right.
But the Maoists will tell you that is why you want to organize a party, actually, to do that, to exercise people's justice. And that's where they're petty bourgeois Democrats, right there. It's about empowering.
Well, look, okay, so all right, I think I'm really very liberal, and maybe statist in some secret ways, because
or legalistic.
Legalistic. Maybe. Yeah, because I have a friend who says, look, if we had trouble with some people who are committing crimes in my neighborhood, in my working class neighborhood, we went over there with sticks and shovels and implements of destruction and told them what's what.
That's fine.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, but why did I think that was okay when I thought it through? Why was that okay? Because it was a way for these people to exert independence from the state.
Sure.
Not so much because I thought
Sure.
they were always going to get it right when they were doing that, you know? So, okay, but also I kind of presumed that the state would be more violent and more far-reaching than these people in their neighborhoods
They
would
surely
be.
could be, but probably would not be. In other words, there are reasons why you'd trust the professional law enforcement people more than you'd trust the random mob. Because they are professionals and they are trained in how to exercise force and whatever. Right? Now, do they also exercise like overwhelming force that seems like completely gratuitous and they don't want to break a nail when they arrest a violent felon? Whereas these people are at least putting their own safety at risk in trying to stop a crime. And so isn't that heroic? Again, this is all petty bourgeois sentimentality, Doug. It is, you know? You might want the drone to fire the Hellfire missile instead. I mean, you know?
But not if you want working class people to develop a sense of independence so that they can organize.
Right. I mean, again, from a theoretical perspective, we have to understand why there are drones with Hellfire missiles. Right. Why there are going to be police robots that are going to come and kill you. Because that's going to happen. Right?
Right.
That's going to happen long before we get to socialism.
Yeah.
I mean, so, you know, it's in other words, it's neither good nor bad. It's bad, but why? It's not because of rich, privileged people, right? Because then the answer will be to like educate some working class BIPOC trans people to program the robots instead, to make sure that they get it right.
Right. No, obviously, look, the problem with the drones is that it reifies and normalizes a perpetual state of war. That's the problem with the drones. It's not the violence in and of itself. They can hit targets that are violent and are criminal and reactionary, but nonetheless, it reifies and naturalizes and normalizes a perpetual sense of war, which we were promised would be the result of the war on terror. Which is one of the reasons I was so dead set against it all, because I did not want to live in a state of permanent warfare.
Right.
And so that's why I opposed the drone strikes, because of that. And because also, if you're in a perpetual state of war, that means you're also in some way or another giving the state the justification for cracking down on the own.
I mean, what we're marching towards, right, as the millennials age and get into positions of responsibility, and as very soon the Zoomers will themselves, you know, age and mature.
We are in that position now. We can still do something. But go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is, you know, defund the police, abolish prisons, you know, decarceralization, all this stuff. It all sounds well and good, and I support all that stuff. Until people realize, well, actually, you need police and you need prisons. And so the only thing that matters is who the police are going after and who's locked up in the prison. And that's why, you know, like you'll get, like, I think Ture Reid or no, it was Cedric Johnson, actually, you know, student of Adolf, rather than a son and student of Adolf, a student of Adolf, who was like, well, Cuba has prisons, so the problem is in prisons. And I'm like, yeah, no, the problem is prisons. Why does Cuba have prisons? Right?
Right.
It's not like, oh, well, you can't do without prisons because Cuba has prisons. It's like, fuck. And this is not to say, oh, Cuba's particularly bad, right? But that we don't want to naturalize this. We don't want to say, oh, as long as it's like the rich, straight, white, male capitalists who are in prison, then it's cool. Or something. As if that's ever going to be the case, right? But, you know? And so I just feel like that's where we're going. In other words, we can, again, like I said with Israel-Palestine, we can jump ahead to the end of the story and know how this is going to play out, which is that this seemingly radical petty bourgeois democratic critique of the status quo is going to be the reconfiguration and rehabilitation of all the evils of the status quo and capitalism. It's just going to have an ideological justification.
Can we get back to that? Because I want to ask you about individualism, and then we can get back to that. So don't let me forget to get back to that.
Okay.
But when I was a kid, in I think junior high or early days of high school, I watched a film which I don't remember the title of. It's very vague recollection, but what it was about was the necessity for the rights of the minority to be respected.
Yeah.
Okay, and it was not about ethnic minorities.
Right.
Okay, it was about
minority opinion.
Most extreme minority, which is the opinion of the individual.
Yep.
Okay, and there was a town, and there were people who were getting sick, and they didn't know why. And one of the townspeople was specializing in bacterial research and studied the pipes in the town and saw that the pipes were releasing this bacteria and making people sick. And he was trying to tell people, and nobody wanted to listen to him because they had spent so much money and time installing those pipes. And he was being against the town. He was speaking out against the best people in the town, and they lynched him.
Yeah.
In the end, right? So what I walked away with is that, it's always important to lean on reason as above sentiment or group identity or assumptions or immediate unthought through self-interest. And that's why I feel like for socialists it's so important to champion the individual, because that's where there might be the potential for reason to develop the most thoroughly. And then of course you want to create a community of individuals. You don't want to create one individual up against the mob. You want to create a community of individuals. So, but I also want to so would you agree that that's why the individual is one of the reasons why the individual is so important is because of the need for public reason?
I mean, certainly that's part of it. I would not instrumentalize it to that extent. In other words, I would not say that it's just about the ability to freely exercise reason that is preserved through minority opinion. Because it might also go beyond, it might go into more practical, dicey realms. I mean, I feel like this is where I'll be very liberal. I'll be like a Karl Popper kind of liberal, like the open society. That an open society is riskier. In other words, an open society is experimental. It's riskier. And it's dangerous, actually. It's more dangerous than a safe society. So the closed society is a safe society. And there's no doubt that you can have safety at the expense of freedom. So the real issue is freedom as a value in and of itself, which means greater risk and greater danger. It does mean that. Necessarily, it does. There's no avoiding it. And so it means that there's going to be more crime, potentially. There's just going to be more danger, more risk in general. And so, again, it's can we have that now? Like, in other words, the critique of Popper by Adorno is that to say that this society is an open society of freedom and risk and danger is to ignore the fact that it's a capitalist society. And that a lot of the danger of the society and destructiveness of the society is not some unavoidable price that we pay for freedom, but is actually unnecessary and contrary to our freedom, actually. Right? But when we think beyond capitalism, when we think of what a society beyond capitalism might look like, it might be a risky and dangerous society, actually. Right? So again, the idea that the freedom that we are aspiring to beyond capitalism will be a safer society than this society, not necessarily.
Yeah, but it will, right. But it won't be an alienated society in the same way. So when we take risks, we will be...
Right.
Huh? We'll be more aware of the risks that we're taking, and we'll be more aware of the responsibility we have for those risks. We'll be able to
bear the danger, bear the risk. This is my point about not being morbidly attached to self-preservation, the way we are now. Right? In other words, what do we want when we want safety now? Either individually or collectively, what we want.
Hold on to our misery.
Hold on to what potential value there is there, like desperately, right? That we wouldn't have to cling to it desperately, that we could say, you know what? Yeah, there's a lot of wasted potential in life. But at least we're not wasting it on capitalism. Right?
Right.
In other words, to get rid of that false necessity changes things.
Mhm.
Right? In other words, there might be some unavoidable risks and dangers, but that's not what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with something else that actually could be overcome, at least presumably. Right? The
Right.
destructive dynamic of capitalism that is actually not necessary or acceptable. Right?
Right.
Now, at the same time, we want to say that all attempts to eliminate the dangers and risks of capitalism in some kind of state-managed social democratic capitalism, aka socialism,
Mhm.
right? We don't want to say that, okay, well, this is like the safety that we have to buy at the expense of freedom. No.
Right.
Right. So here's the tricky part. That's where I feel like, there are people who are willing to make that wager, to make that kind of devil's bargain, like right now.
Oh, most people, I think,
Yeah.
right now.
Including people on the left. I don't care about the right-wing people. Of course, they'll do whatever. The so-called leftist people, right? That's the problem right there, is how they rationalize that. Now, in terms of preserving of the individual and against the petty bourgeois mob and the struggle session, lynch mob, justice, people's justice against that is, I think that that's more or less unavoidable on the one hand. On the other hand, you don't want to raise it to a principle, certainly. You don't want to adopt it as a means either. In other words, Marxism understood that the proletarian socialist party is going to be accompanied by petty bourgeois realities that are unavoidable.
Right.
The problem is that you don't want to call those things anything other than what they are, right? And nor do you want to naturalize them, nor do you want to say that,
or hold them up as a good or an aim.
yeah, and that it's a good, that it's it's like a progressive thing. It's like a something that we have to accept in principle in some way. So it's kind of like, again, we have to be clear about our means and our ends in what we're struggling for, and what is necessary and what's not necessary, and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable at the level of principle. At the level of reality, we may have to accept all sorts of things.
Right. So, like, let's take the Me Too movement for an example.
The
Me Too movement is good because it was a way to circumvent due process. It was a matter of a community of women or community of feminists standing up to real moments of oppression and abuse in society. But their means were often produce bad results and were indiscriminate and did violate the idea of due process and seeking out
individual rights.
And individual rights. So should the left have then condemned Me Too because of
including the right to not be held to something that you did 30 years earlier?
Right, that's true too.
Fundamentally unjust about that.
There is, because you can't. Right, for two reasons. One, you can have you might have changed over those 30 years, and be contributing more to society. You may have made amends in some way over those 30 years, but also the evidence that is 30 years old has gone stale and is likely to
even
very
in the case of new evidence, right? Because now they're getting better at DNA.
Yeah.
Right?
I guess they are.
No, they are. Now they can convict you on like one molecule,
But how hard is it to play? How hard is it to okay? How hard is it to find one molecule to drop
we
into?
have to stick to the rights of the guilty.
Yeah, okay.
The actually guilty, we do. Like, in other words, because that's the limit case, if you will.
Right.
Right. That's the basis of 100 guilty men should go free instead of one innocent man be unjustly punished.
Right.
The actual basis of that is not the injustice of punishing an innocent person, but also the justice of letting Guilty people go free.
This one's difficult to swallow. I can start to see your point, but you have to walk me through it once, and then.
But
maybe I'll have to
also,
walk through it
there's
again.
justice and there's justice, meaning like there's the state, but there's also the community. In other words, do I want the state, the capitalist state, to achieve justice for me? I guess. But would I want just like my community to do so? Like, how would I feel about that? Like, someone actually did something to me that harmed me, let's say. And then, I don't know, the SAIC campus community, like, has, like, a people's trial of the person. How would I feel about that? Wouldn't I feel like, aren't you ganging up on this person?
Well, look, for me, the easiest way to understand what you're saying, and this will probably show my.
And isn't the self-righteousness of these people who are speaking in my name, isn't it a little bit unseemly?
It's just Christian doctrine.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the easiest way for me to understand it. When someone does you wrong, forgive them. Turn the other cheek. Give them an opportunity.
Without sin, throw the first stone. In other words, do I want the community to stone someone for me? Because I'm like, who the fuck are these motherfuckers stoning this person? Like, yeah, this person hurt me. Really what I want is to move on with my life, and I want my harm to be recognized, maybe. I don't want the person to harm me again. But am I really looking forward to the malicious glee with which the just good people take revenge for my harm? Whoa.
Right. So it's a matter of forgiveness, not for people who did nothing wrong.
No.
But forgiveness for precisely those who wronged you. That's Christian doctrine. And so why is Christian doctrine rational? It's because you're presuming that people can overcome their sinful nature, that they deserve to be forgiven, that it isn't for you to work out who has done this and who hasn't, but rather.
I'll also say that there's a wisdom to Christianity, and also other religions have this. It's not exclusive to Christianity whatsoever. There's no justice in this life, really. There's no justice available in this life, meaning vengeance is mine, God said. And that is just true. In other words, you can't repair a harm. There's no justice, really.
Right.
And that's the wisdom of it. The wisdom of it is don't continue the harm because you can't make up for it anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So it's not about I'm going to be the bigger person and forgive, and it's more like shit happens. People do bad things, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. Right? Like you can, execute someone for murder. It's not going to bring the murdered person back.
Right.
It's as simple as that. I mean,
right.
So, right?
Yeah.
And so, in other words, it's not about some kind of great ethical achievement that you turn the other cheek. It's about, is your life going to be about pursuit of justice that's not possible anyway?
Well, I mean, look, if you don't have anything else for your life to be about, it might work.
Sure.
But, it gives you something to do every day.
Right.
But okay, so back to Hamas and what we're talking about before that I wanted to come back to. When you say that the left that is opposing Biden now on the question of the support for what Mearsheimer is saying is a genocidal attack in Gaza, and which many people are saying is a genocidal attack in Gaza, and which, by definition of put forward by the UN, looks to me like it is perhaps a genocidal attack or on the verge of being genocidal. And that just means that people being displaced from their homes in mass by the state based on their ethnicity. That's what, intentionally as a political act. That's genocide. We should be clear. Extermination is not the full that's not the only definition. So violent actions taken to displace people en masse,
to extirpate a community.
Yeah.
Or
that
damage.
Is genocide.
Yeah.
So, which is a horrible thing to do. It's nothing small, nothing to sneeze at. So,
right.
And absolutely unjust. But so the critique of Biden for supporting Israel in their which I don't support. Like, I think
Right.
that Biden's support of Israel's bombardment of Gaza is absolutely reprehensible and should be criticized. Nonetheless, the way it's being done now, you're saying, and I think I agree with you, that the way it's being enacted will only lead to reinforcing the Democratic Party eventually. But I think of that intuitively. I kind of base that on the fact that I don't think of the Democratic Party as monolithic.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even think
it's precisely it's not monolithic, right?
Right. But I don't even mean, when I say that it will go back in the Democratic Party, that the side that is critiquing Israel will win within the
right. No, it won't. Right. Not necessarily.
It just that what we're going to see as a result is a Republican victory, and the realization that the Republicans are no more able to curb or control or overcome the conflict in Israel and Palestine, and the fading away of it being the most primary issue, and a return to the Democrats. And then maybe it will mean that will happen in such a way during this overall realignment, which will change the Democratic Party, but I can't predict how. But what do you think will happen?
Right.
How will this work itself out?
Well, okay, so a couple of things about genocide. Okay, so 2-point-something million people in Gaza, right? And 20-something thousand dead, which probably means, I don't know, at least 100,000 wounded.
Yeah.
Right? But still 100,000 out of 2-point-something million is not a genocide. What it is a war. And what I would say about that, let's steel man the Israeli argument for a second.
Yeah, but it's a war that using means which ought to be crimes even in times of war.
I guess.
Because
I mean, I'm not
the bombardment of civilians.
The dumb bombs. I mean, I've paid attention. I've paid very close attention to all this, and I've thought about it, right? And it's not that I want to give Israel a pass, but let's steel man it, right? Which is to say that they claim that out of the 20,000 casualties, a third are Hamas fighters. And that as such, the casualty rate is better than the US did in Afghanistan and Iraq. In other words, civilian to combatant ratio in such fighting, in urban fighting, right? And I guess they're also including wounded. I guess if we were to say that, we still would have to have a basis for objecting to the war.
Well, we do, but it's not a different basis. Just because
But I think it does change things. In other words, we can bracket the issue of genocide. In other words, it's not like wars are acceptable unless they're genocidal. No.
Well, okay, right.
Right? And so that's why I want to say, whether it's genocidal or not, including, is the goal to displace the people of Gaza? And that could be the goal. It could not be the goal. In other words, I think that Israel reserves the right to depopulate Gaza, to basically say, we refuse to have a strip of land jutting into our territory that's going to be a rocket base forever, raining down stuff on us. And we're going to be in a constant state of trying to keep pace technologically with the sophistication of the rockets. Because the rockets are more sophisticated now than they were 10 years ago. And Israel's anti-ballistic shield has had to keep pace, and you do that forever. That they could just say, no state would ever accept being constantly bombarded or having the threat of constant bombardment from its neighbor. That's true. And that in order to uproot Hamas might mean removing the population of Gaza and sending them to wherever. Sinai, the rest of the Arab world, to the west. The US should take them. Europe should take them. Maybe some of them should go to the West Bank, whatever, right? I think that they basically are like, we might do that. And they're holding that out, right? And that sounds like awful, and that's genocide. And yes, of course it is. But it's also war. It is also war, meaning that is not unheard of in the annals of war, including recent wars. including counterinsurgencies taking place right now, like in Myanmar or someplace like that, where they have ethnic breakaway groups and where they routinely depopulate whole villages and areas in order to uproot a armed force that is going against the state. Right? So again, for me, the issue is, what is the basis for objecting to that? In other words, it's not about saying this crime is particularly bad. Or it's not even about saying this is a crime. In other words, war. Like, let's say they follow all the rules of international law and warfare. Does that make it more acceptable? Right? That's where I feel like we have to start there.
I think, okay, I think I'm going to let you keep going. I'm just going to say, I think Jacob Siegel would say maybe.
Yeah, sure, he would. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's not a socialist, right?
No.
Okay, so in other words, I think that, again, I'm willing to grant the upright principles and lawfulness of everything Israel is doing, even though Jacob Siegel would say no, they are doing the wrong thing, and for just that the other reasons, right? But I don't want to get into basically a technical or tactical criticism of Israeli policy. Right? Because basically any anti-war opposition in Israel is going to be no less Zionist. Right? In the definition that the left might have with regard to Zionism. And certainly with regard to how Hamas and Fatah see the problem of Zionism. Right? In other words, they do object to the existence of Israel per se, to a Jewish nation state on the land of historic Palestine. They object to that per se. And they always will. In other words, they're only going to be maneuvering for position.
So you think a civil rights movement inside Israel, which would grant every citizen equal protection before the law, equal rights to land,
within the green line, because they're not for extending that to the occupants of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. No. In other words, they're not for making them Israeli citizens. They're not.
Well, let's say that they did. Let's say everyone.
That's the one-state solution, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that's the end of the state of Israel as previously defined, which is a Jewish privileged state, but not an exclusively Jewish state, meaning there are non-Jews who have equal rights. They do.
Yeah, the idea is instead you have a bourgeois republic.
Right. Well, but there are all sorts of bourgeois republics. In other words, like bourgeois republic doesn't preclude blood and soil nationalism. It doesn't.
Right. Okay, but I'm using a definition that would exclude blood and soil nationalism.
Yeah, you're talking about the United States. I mean, what I'm saying is this: if Mexico decided tomorrow, let's say that there's an election, and the government of Mexico says, you know what, we never did accept that California, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas are part of the United States. What would happen?
I think it would go the way of Syriza.
Well, no, maybe not.
I mean, like, the government would go, well, that vote didn't count.
And but let's say that they had a popular election. They actually elected that, and there was, and the Mexican bourgeoisie was on board with it. And let's say that Russia and China and EU said, you know what, they're right. What would the United States do? The United States would overthrow the government of Mexico. They would definitely, especially if they if the Mexicans start making military actions on whatever scale, if they just did little minor incursions across the border. Okay?
Yeah. So
what would socialists have to say about that? That's the analogy.
The socialists would say that they were on the side of Mexico, I think.
Well, the idiot leftists today would. I don't know that I would.
No, I don't know. Okay, what would I say? I would say I was against the war. And why not? Why?
Which war? The Mexican war in the United States?
Yes. And against the
And
United
the U.S.
States.
defending itself, even
I
though
would
it's a
say,
pathetic attempt by
let's
Mexico.
get rid of the border and have one state with everyone having the same
But
rights.
how would you achieve that? In other words,
I wouldn't. It would just be a gesture, Chris.
No,
I
no,
have
but
no idea.
do you want a unified capitalist state in which the Mexican and American capitalists agree to jointly rule over the entire territory of Mexico and the United States? Or would
Might
you
be preferable to a war between the United States and Mexico.
Would it? But what about the self-determination and autonomy and democratic rights of citizens of the United States? Would the citizens of the United States have the right to vote for a government that refuses such a agreement?
I would campaign for the.
See, so the citizens of Israel have the right to elect a government that rejects a one-state solution with the Palestinians.
I think they do.
This is where we are, by the way.
But I would advocate through politics as a liberal.
The Palestinians have a right to elect a government that refuses to accept the state of Israel.
They do.
Yeah, see, this is what we're talking about, right? So this is why this is it, right? So in other words, why does Mexico not do that? Because they lost that war. They lost that war a long time ago.
Right.
Right? And they might hope one day that over the course of decades or centuries, the United States will become Mexico. Because it might. In other words, the population might just become Latinized. And it just might.
I don't think they do.
They don't even, right? So in other words, when we're talking about like two-state solution, one-state solution, the future, Zionism, a Jewish state, like what is the United States? Is the United States an Anglo state? It is and it isn't. Formally, it is not. In practice, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's the thing. So do you want to elect people in Israel who change the definition of the Israeli state so that it's not formally Jewish anymore? Would that change anything? Because
I think it would. I think not being an Anglo state formally does.
No, it's good. It's preferable, and it's preferable for Israel too. But would that satisfy the needs for Palestinian self-determination? It wouldn't, actually.
No,
it wouldn't.
It wouldn't. Although you might.
In other words,
well, look, what James Smith would say is, well, look, if you did that, the Palestinians would just take over Israel because they have more people and they would be able to elect their government.
So right of return, right? Right of return. Let's say that Mexico's like, we don't accept the resolution of the War of 1848, but we're willing to accept the borders if you allow all the descendants of the people who now live in Mexico who used to live in those states to reclaim citizenship in the United States.
How many people is that?
It could be a lot, it could be a little, right? But would the U.S. agree to that? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the right of return amounts to.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. Well, but no, we also can throw in the settlements.
The settlements. Okay, so what if Mexico said, we'll accept these borders as long as all American citizens currently residing in Mexico are kicked out? Wouldn't the
United States might negotiate that way, depending on the military threat from
would
Mexico.
That be a violation of the rights of the Americans living in Mexico because they like to live there on a lower income? All the retirees.
Not anymore, because those rights would be rewritten.
Well, but you know what I mean. So, in other words, and let's say that some expat Americans living in Mexico live in condo communities that have walls around them and that have private security guarding them against the local Mexicans.
Yeah, that'd be ugly.
No, I mean, look, so again, like, I just feel like we just need to really demystify, like, the thing that I can't stand about the Israel-Palestine thing is how mystified it is. Meaning, the Palestinian side could have right on its side, and the Israelis could be totally in the wrong. But let's demystify it, please. We have to think about it that way. And also, again, firstly, demystify. Secondly, what would socialists have to say about it? Right? And socialists would be aiming for a dictatorship of the proletariat. It's in my book, Make America Mexico Again. No, I'm for a dictatorship of the proletariat that encompasses both the United States and Mexico.
Right. Yeah.
I do not support the Mexican nationalist Make America Mexico Again. Nor do I support the status quo in which the United States has a disproportionate power over Mexico. Although it never was that great, and it's not particularly great. Mexico is, the largest economy, I think, besides Canada in the Western Hemisphere, besides the United States. It's big. Right. It's got, some of the world's wealthiest billionaires. It's got like a serious capitalist presence on a global stage, actually, Mexico. It's not some abject, right? And so, obviously the Palestinians are not in that position. No. They aren't, right? But again, what are we talking about, right? And then, does Israel rely on Palestinian labor? Has it? Yes. Did it wean itself of that dependence? Yes. Does it still, however? Yes. Meaning now Israel needs to, bring in more foreign workers because under the present Gaza war situation, there are fewer Palestinian workers available. So they have to take immediate action to bring more foreign workers in. And where would socialists stand on that?
They would be opposed to that. They would be for more Palestinian workers in Israel.
Not necessarily. They would be for organizing all the workers.
Yeah, but right, I agree.
And they would be for organizing them in such a way so that the foreign workers don't become a political force. They might be an economic force, but not a political force against the Palestinians.
Right. Well, I would say what you want to do is if you think that resolving the conflict will help create conditions for the organizing of a dictatorship of the proletariat, then you would want more Palestinian workers.
Maybe. It's tricky because it has to do, the Hamas and Islamic Jihad took some foreign worker hostages. Why would they bother? Because they also just killed some, meaning they didn't see it worthwhile to either let them go or take them hostage. So they just massacred them. And that was to send a message, don't be a foreign worker working in Israel. But then they did take some hostages. Why? Because it's pressure on those foreign governments, which then becomes pressure on Israel. It's all politics. There's nothing humanitarian about any of it.
Right.
Right? And so do we want more foreign governments to have a stake in Israel, both positively and negatively, through the presence of foreign citizens as guest workers in Israel? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on the state of the international working class and its self-organization and in the home countries of the foreign guest workers. Right? That's got to be, it can't be like this localism. Again, the petty bourgeois democracy is yes, we should prefer Palestinian workers to, Palestinian workers from where? Palestinian workers from the United States or only from Gaza and the West Bank? Right?
Well, I would say the reason you would prefer Palestinians to be given more right to work within Israel and to have more of an opportunity to work within the West Bank and Gaza
is reparative. Because
yeah,
it's reparative. Absolutely. Yeah. That the Israelis owe the Palestinians at least that much.
Right. And it will create conditions for negotiation.
Maybe, but again, that's not really a socialist consideration. That's a petty bourgeois democratic consideration, that kind of sense of justice. It is. And can socialists build on that? Yes.
No, I'm not saying because I want some just outcome. I don't think. I think I want an outcome where solidarity
and solidarity. Yeah. That's all good too. Absolutely, that's good. Right. This is why. The Abraham Accords or whatever, right? Very controversial because it's Trump, and so we know it's not good. And it's about pressure on Iran, which is not good, pressure on the Palestinians, which is not good. Well, actually, part of the Abraham Accords was it was a bargaining chip for the Palestinians against Israel. That is baked in, actually. The UAE has come out and said part of the agreement of the Abraham Accords was precisely to stop the expansion of settlements and at least preserve the status quo and come back to the negotiating table with Israel Palestine. Right? So in other words, it's not like the kleptocratic, dictatorial, undemocratic Arab sellout regimes abandoning the Palestinians. It could become that, but it actually wasn't that. Right? But the left is so like just insistent on its narrative that it can't admit any realities.
Well, for me, the worst part is the way in which the debate is going on around rapes.
Oh, boy.
Violence.
I know. No, the gaslighting, I mean, obviously the denial of reality goes really deep. And everything's just a talking point. It's all propaganda. That's Stalinism, too.
You lose your humanity when you enter into the realm of saying, oh, yeah, I'm going to decide what happened for political reasons. I don't know to a degree to which those rapes happened or didn't.
What happened and what didn't happen. It's not just about the facts. It's about the narrative. It's about the story. It's about which facts you pay attention to. And again, I feel like that came up in the James Smith discussion too. Like, what do you prioritize rhetorically?
Right.
And I just thought, well, that kind of calculation assumes that we're in this fine-grained struggle within capitalist politics.
Mm-hmm.
That we just have to forswear now. We just have to say, we're not in that world.
Yeah. And I think that was my answer to him as well.
Yeah,
right?
We're not governed by these considerations. Like, yeah, you might say something that's inconvenient for your friends and convenient for your enemies, but so what? Right? Right. I mean, I guess it boiled down to, with the two of you, he's like, you, Doug, have forsaken any immediate possibilities, whereas he, James Smith, still saw some more immediate possibilities.
Right.
And it's like, but that's not exactly it either. In other words, it's really about what are we actually building towards? Meaning there are enough rad libs, petty bourgeois radical Democrats in the world. They can do their thing. What is the thing that's being neglected?
Right. Yeah, what I think he also admitted in that debate was that he didn't actually have any immediate political aims either, other than raising the consciousness of the injustice around the Palestinian issue and turning the left against the Biden administration.
Right. So that's the sort of left populism or whatnot. But in the service of what, though, right? That's the thing. And is the point. I mean, in other words, I don't pretend that, the result of the election this year is going to be better or worse for my concerns.
I think it's going to be worse no matter what.
It is going to be kind of worse no matter what. I mean, there's abundant evidence of that. Actually. And, but also I'm just not going to be a slave to the news cycle and get into, like, I don't know, what was it, like Claudine Gay being fired from the Harvard presidency? I
have a take on that. I think it's an important fact that she got fired. I do. And I think it's bad news that she got fired. Because it's a re-entrenchment of the censorship state.
Is it?
Yeah. It's them policing their own, and it's a re-entrenchment.
How is it a censorship thing, though?
Well, because the reason she was fired was for refusing to abridge the rights of students on these campuses to protest.
Actually, that's not the reason she was fired. If she hadn't done plagiarism, she would not have been fired. Seriously.
You know what?
She would have been fired. No way.
She might have survived, but there's two other professors who are being targeted and are going to be resigning, and they have not been found guilty of plagiarism. The
Harvard professors?
No, MIT.
You mean the presidents? You mean the presidents, right? Not professors.
Did I say
presidents?
I'm sorry, presidents. Yeah.
Presidents.
Right,
so the one already resigned, and the other is being pressured to resign. I mean, there are a couple of ways of looking at that. One is the job of a president is to do PR, and if they did a bad job of PR, then they're incompetent for the job, right? Meaning, I don't think that's what they said at the congressional hearing. I think it's how they said it. I think that they were being carefully legalistic, litigious, conscious. Like, and that it seemed insincere. In other words, I think that the board of trustees of these schools don't want to like shield Israel from criticism and protest. I think they want smooth talking presidents who can navigate the rough waters. In other words, I don't think that the board of trustees of these institutions are either Zionist nor pro-Palestinian.
I agree, but I think that nonetheless, the power of the actual censorship industrial complex was demanding.
It's a game.
Censorship.
It's a game. At least
and I don't think any Harvard president would have been able to withstand that moment without being a casualty of it. If she had stood up and said, "Look, we follow the First Amendment and we protect the First Amendment rights."
Well, she did say that. What Lee Stefanik then turned around and said is, "We're not talking about the First Amendment rights of students. We're talking about a student code of conduct at your university. Does it violate the student code of conduct to call for the genocide of Jews?" And
the answer is no. The answer is no, it doesn't. Okay, that's the actual answer to that.
Right. And somehow they didn't say it just like that.
They couldn't say that because they couldn't say that because the student code of conduct is written in such a way that actually maybe it does. But
I said it would depend on the context. And people were very unhappy with that because they wanted someone to say anti-Semitism is bad in a very unequivocal way. It was a gotcha. And that's unfair. Gotchas are unfair. They are.
Well, but wait. The DEI approach to conduct on campuses is opposed to the First Amendment.
That's true.
Okay. And so,
in other words, I want students to have full freedom of speech on campus. I don't want there to be any student conduct codes that prevent people from being Hitler Youth. I don't.
Right. And the result of these firings is not going to be that, is all I'm saying.
That's true.
So this is a re-entrenchment.
But it's already true. It's already true.
It's already true. But now there was a moment where the Republican Party was largely opposed to the censorship industrial complex. Now the Republican Party has been folded back into through this.
They were always fair weather friends, and they were always unreliable on this score. Absolutely.
I know, but now they're no longer fair. They're no longer friends.
Now they're enemies. Absolutely. No, I agree. No, I totally agree. I mean, it's one of these things where it's tricky because universities, I want them to be free speech environments, but they're also in loco parentis environments.
Well,
right?
Are they supposed to be?
They are.
I mean, I thought that was overturned in the 60s. I thought that,
No, to a certain extent, it's still there. And of course, the Title IX stuff. Me too. Title IX stuff, right? And
the Title IX stuff predates Me Too, but
Right. But it builds on that, and Obama did expand the definition of Title IX protection in such a way that is problematic. But at the same time, it is the case that in loco parentis in this instance doesn't mean authority over students, right? That's not the way it's posed. It's posed rather as, if you don't protect these students, the parents can sue you. Because that's the only thing they care about, by the way. The only thing that they care about is, are they open lawsuits from parents if something bad happens to their kids? That's the bottom line. That is the bottom line. So, in other words, if a Jewish student gets injured at a pro-Palestinian demonstration on campus, can the parents sue the school? That's the only thing anybody cares about.
Right.
Remember that, right? So why I bring up the in loco parentis role is that if that role didn't exist, then that would not be a concern. But that role does exist, and therefore they are open to litigation, and therefore it's a concern.
Yeah, but so like if they have a rule on campus that says you can't have keggers in the dorms, you can't have alcohol in the dorms, and the enforcement is shaky, and there are keggers in the dorms,
and somebody
but the rules there,
then
then someone dies.
They can get sued.
No, they can say, look, we had the rule. These students violated the rule.
Or they could say this staff member failed to implement the rule and put it on the employee.
And probably some student employee whose job was to oversee the dorm. I mean, what are they called?
Concerned with, can they fob it off onto the employees?
Mm-hmm.
Can they fire an employee rather than be open to a lawsuit? That's what it's really about, by the way. The Title IX stuff is all about that. It's about, can you say the school's not responsible because this employee failed to implement policy?
Right. And the way it worked with the sexual assault and harassment was whenever there was an incident.
The accusation credibly or not?
Right. And then and you would,
as a staff,
expel the students as a way to.
Oh, you expel the students, but also you say that staff all have to be trained to be first responders to complaints of sexual harassment.
Right.
I'm a professor, so I know that if a student comes to me and says that they're being sexually harassed by another student and I don't take action on it, I could be fired.
Right.
Because the school is not going to allow itself to be sued through my inaction. Like, in other words, if I say, well, is that really sexual harassment? I actually don't have that option. I have to report it.
Right.
Otherwise, I'm fired.
And then they have a process.
So how's that for free speech? What if that's a performance art thing that I take seriously but wasn't really meant seriously?
Well, then that will be discovered by the committee.
Well, if there are rules of evidence, it does. If that matters, because it's very formalistic. In other words, it doesn't mean whether it was really meant or not. What matters is whether it could be taken to be truthful.
Right. Yeah.
What? Right. And again, but all of that comes from loco parentis, and it all comes from litigation. That's all that it's about, ever. It's all about that. And it's shitty, right? But it's not a place for us to talk about free speech relative to the state, nor relative to society as a whole. In other words, it's not the same. So speech codes on campus are not the same as speech codes online. Although there are bureaucrats in the wings ready to make them the same. Formally, legally, with regard to legal culpability litigation, lawsuit immunity, they're not the same.
Right. Okay. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I think you're absolutely right in a way, but on the other hand, if you are, if
she was fired for bad PR, she was fired for bad PR.
Yeah, but if you got the Congress enforcing,
you could say at least Stefanik's a total bitch for doing that, for playing the gotcha game, and Christopher Rufo was wrong to even investigate the plagiarism allegation. Why was she even investigated? She was investigated because she's a prominent black woman who said something un-PC and therefore unfairly targeted. That's true. But, again, what's her job? Claudine Gay's job. She's got two jobs. One job is to be the PR person for Harvard University, failed. The other job is to be an academic, and the plagiarism, she failed at that.
I know. I'm not saying my heart does not break for her, but my point is just let's look at the results.
But also, does it set a bad tone? Is it like a victory for racism? No, come on, no. Right? Because that's what the left is saying. The left is saying this is a victory of racism.
What I would say is that,
and that becomes part of the same story. Palestinians and black people are all the same victims of racism, and I'm like, no. No. Yeah,
I'm just saying if the left were trying to push for protecting free speech rights, and even when it was in opposition to Title IX or in local parentis, that would be a much stronger position to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And if we think of Harvard professors as part of Harvard presidents as part of the left,
well, that's another problem. No, I mean, the other thing is, so the culture wars, I mean, it's terrible. I would say, so my takeaway from the Claudine Gay situation is this. It blows the lid off academia. Meaning, you can be sure there's a hell of a lot of plagiarism in academia. A hell of a lot. Why? Because nobody reads anything. Nobody checks.
Right.
Nobody reads. So it's pure cynicism. In other words, of course you publish things that are just cut and paste from other people because no one will ever know.
Right.
And so, to my mind, it's just about a late revelation of how intellectually bankrupt academia is. How completely bankrupt it is. And how originality is punished and unoriginality is rewarded. In a literal sense of like the path to academic success is plagiarism for sure.
Huh.
That is
Yeah.
the path. Because if you try to say something original, for instance, as I did,
Mm-hmm.
then it's incomprehensible. No one wants to hear it, and it's academic failure. If you say everything that everyone already agrees with, they're like, this is solid scholarship.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. No, it is true that I remember when I was when I was in college studying philosophy, trying to read philosophical journals. And then later on, when I was first doing the podcast, going to the university library and checking out like the latest edition of philosophical journals and finding them to be uninspiring, not empty, but uninspiring.
Right.
And
now there's a deep academic conformism. It's also the publish or perish thing, which is horrible because it's literally a quantitative metric.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, I mean, the way that I like to put it is the only people who read academic journals are undergraduates.
Right. Which is when I did it.
Right. And, and nobody cares about the undergraduates who are reading those journals.
And why do undergraduates read those journals? I mean, I know why I did.
Curious.
Right.
In other words, they're the only people foolish enough to think that academia is about satisfying your intellectual curiosity. So credulously, we read the journals. I did that. I was like, oh, life of the mind. Let's read the latest publication on this and that. And just like, oh, of course, this is a good faith, honest intellectual exercise, not realizing it's all about doxa.
Right.
And then as you advance in your understanding, then you realize, oh, it's doxa. Right. So what's most significant is what's not addressed rather than what is addressed, what's left out, what's suppressed.
Right.
Right. That's the significance of this stuff.
Well, where I really saw it was when my ex was first in nursing school and she would bring home these academic articles about evidence-based care and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I would read it and they'd be like citing Foucault or whoever. And I was like, they just have no understanding of what they're citing. I mean, I'm not the deepest thinker on these things.
But
I'm
still,
pretty good.
It's rhetorical.
Yeah.
It's lip service.
And it was shocking to me because it's a medical journal on ethics, but like the guiding policy in our hospitals and shit for real practical nurses who are going to be, administering care. And this is what they get, really?
Yeah, no, it's very vapid. And like I said, it's the publish or perish imperative, which is just really corrosive because it means that what matters is that you publish rather than what you publish.
Well, look, we've wandered into just grumping and complaining. But
in all seriousness, Marxism intellectually has no place in academia. Because Marxism cannot become this doxa rhetoric. And insofar as it does, it's a total violation of the true substance of Marxism. Right. And so, I know that academic Marxism is a contradiction in terms. Mm-hmm. Right? I also know that the 60s generation are the last generation that are allowed to be in any way intellectually curious or honest or interesting or original, right? And that our generation, starting with our generation, but certainly with those younger, that it's just pure copy-paste. And the only thing you do is, like Claudine Gay, you substitute African-American for black when you're copying something that's a little antiquated. And that's actually is originality. That's original scholarship, is that you've kept pace with the changing use of language, but you literally the same words, but it's no longer okay to say black, so now you have to say African American.
Or is that right? Or the other way around now? I thought it was now black again and no longer African.
Well, it might be, but when she published what she published, you could be sure she had to say African American and not black, right? Which means that when people plagiarize her in the future, they may have to change it back to black.
That's right. That's right.
Right, and that's
Yeah.
good scholarship.
The other thing about Claudine Gay, and then we'll wrap it up maybe, but is she's responsible for through a sex scandal getting rid of
Yes,
heterodox
yes,
black economists,
yes.
along with other people at
No,
Harvard.
she was an enforcer. That's how she became president. Is that she was a PC enforcer, as all these administrators are. Right. That's one reason why I'm just like I think that probably honestly she didn't understand that plagiarism was wrong.
Really?
In the sense of she probably doesn't think she did anything wrong. Meaning she probably understood her role in such a way as that this is just what you do, and that the most important thing for her to do is to be a PC enforcer.
Well, I can see why she might think that. I looked at the things that she plagiarized, and it was such gobbledygook to me that I
it's very anodyne, progressive, liberal, common sense stuff, right? She's a political science, person.
I couldn't really make heads or tails out of the paragraph on its own.
It's jargony. It's jargony.
Yeah.
But what I'd say is, what I always tell my students in academia, I say, what am I doing here? Like, I'm a professor, but nobody cares what I'm teaching you. I could be teaching you Deleuze and Guattari. I could be teaching you anything. Like, I have colleagues who teach Korean soap operas, right? Who are educated in the Frankfurt School, who wrote dissertations on the Frankfurt School, and who now have their students watch Korean soap operas and talk about how it makes them feel. So they have the school, the institution does not care at all what I'm teaching. What do they care about? The language I use, and keeping a safe space for the students. She met those criteria. That's the only thing they care about. And I'm supposed to publish because the school is supposed to be able to say that their professors have this many publications. It doesn't matter what I publish. It just matters that it is published.
In the right places.
Yeah.
In a peer-reviewed journal.
Yeah, in a peer-reviewed journal, which means that the peer reviewers are the only ones who will ever read it, if they themselves actually read it in any careful way. But no one else will ever read it. And basically, what the peer reviewers are looking for is essentially maintenance of the doxa.
Well, there used to be core curriculum that you really did have to teach.
I did, but that was not, the research faculty didn't do it. In other words, the tenure track faculty were exempt from that teaching. That was for adjuncts, graduate students, and a few souls of the old guard who were still dedicated to the great books, curriculum, college experience. But all those younger than them, professors, tried to evade responsibility for teaching that stuff as much as possible. So instead, what's happened is that they've hired full-time non-tenure track people to teach it. And those people also hate teaching it, but it's the only way they can make an income.
Why do they hate teaching it?
Because it's all dead white men, and nobody cares about these ideas anyway, and the University of Chicago is so backward, but they want to live in a city, they want a decent income, and so they take the job.
Wow.
The cynicism is unbelievable. Like, in other words, I can't even represent it, how cynical the whole thing is. It's a total rotten fraud. And the lid has been blown off with Claudine Gay, and I refuse to be distracted from that.
Okay. Can you see why I'm thinking about this in terms of censorship? And
I get it, but I also think that she's a censor. That's her job.
I know. No, I mean, I'm not denying that.
Right.
I'm just saying the firing of this censor is not a victory over censorship.
It is not. It is not.
She was fired for not censoring well enough. That was what she was fired for.
It's a live by the sword, die by the sword situation.
Right, which may give me a sense of Schadenfreude, but it doesn't give me a sense
I don't actually relish it. I don't. Because actually, I feel like she was unfairly blindsided. But I also feel like, as someone who cares about intellectual life and education, I do also welcome, not in her particular case, I guess I would have been happier to have a PC straight white guy become victim. I
Why?
guess. Yeah, just because I think PC is mostly a game for straight white guys anyway, or at least straight white people. In other words, I think it's a massive disservice to people of color and minorities. I think it's a massive condescension and disrespect of people, right? So I think it's a white person's game, the whole PC thing, you know, and you know, so I would hoist it on their own petard. I would rather it have been not someone that I can feel like, oh, they thought they were playing the game and suddenly they discovered they weren't playing the game and they rightly feel unfairly treated. Right? In other words, they feel like, I'm sure she feels like Harvard hired me and they should defend me.
Yeah, and that's probably true.
Right.
Well, listen, I should go. My phone's ringing, but yeah, we'll talk again soon. And I'll just say, at Sublation Media, we're not so cynical. We care about these ideas.
Yes.
We may not be Harvard grads, or even, you know, or I know I would never get into Harvard, never applied, but we're glad to take these ideas seriously, and we're not going to
absolutely
kowtow to the academic culture.
Absolutely.
All right, so I'm going to end it there.